What is up, guys? Brian here, and welcome back to Direct Admission. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking with Dr. Tony Vullo about his reasoning why he left a big health system to pursue locum tenens. And those that don't know what that means, it pretty much means that he pursued contract work instead. He goes over all the reasons why he did it and all the reasons why everyone else should potentially look into it as well. So on that note, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into the interview. Today we have Dr. Vullo, Dr. Tony Vullo. I don't think I've actually ever called you Dr. Vullo, to be honest.
That's okay, because we're all just people. It's okay.
So he's a locum tenens physician, and to be honest, before we talked about this before while we were working together, but I never actually knew what it meant until I started reading your blog posts. Or your website. Is it considered a blog?
I don't know. I think most people in this world don't say blog anymore. I know I've been a victim of accidentally calling it that, but it's a website. It's everything. Yeah.
So I listened to your interview with the APM Success podcast.
Harvey. Yeah.
So I listened to that. A lot of insightful stuff that I didn't know about you before. Like I didn't know your upbringings. I thought you came from a family that had physicians in it or people in medical. But so if you could dive into your humble beginnings of getting into medicine, can you go into that?
Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, of course.
Very happy to be here. I don't know what other physicians' experiences have been like with this, but this is something that for some reason with me and also through my wife about me has come up many times, which is I think people have an assumption that maybe most people that are physicians have a certain, your family's a little bit more, what do you call it? White collar, something like that. So no, I didn't have that experience. I grew up in a family where no one was a physician. No one was a lawyer. The only physician I knew who in any way, shape, or form was my pediatrician and our family's doctor. And so in my family, I had people that worked a lot. I come from a family on my mom's side, a lot of people that are restaurant work people. And so my mom did hotel management at Cornell. She ran a on-premise catering, so like a banquet hall, but with the food, et cetera. So you're not just renting the hall. That was her career. And my grandparents, they had a similar background. They ran a inn, they ran a hotel, they ran the Letchworth State Park in upstate New York. They ran the Glen Iris Inn for 20 something years to its sort of peak of that time. And if you go there now, beautiful place to visit, but I would not recommend the food in that place as much as it was back in the 80s, back when it was really in the heyday, early 80s, late 70s. So I had people like that. So I was around people that were unfortunately very busy, unfortunately missing things in the evenings, missing things in the weekends, and for the most part working weekends and nights more than anything. And my dad had various jobs throughout his time, but he did insurance sales. After my parents got divorced and they had the on-premise, that big banquet hall facility, my mom continued. He started making macaroni salad, which is a big upstate New York thing that goes with all the hot Hamburg places. If you've ever been to Nick Tahoe's and all the garbage plates.
Yep.
That's right. And so he did that. And that was a, up at 3:30 job, finish around noon, make all the deliveries, a lot of physical labor involved, which of course we got involved in too, especially when you're old enough to drive, wake
Help
up
out.
early. Yeah. And just remember to lock the doors when the crackheads come out to try and get stuff in the morning, try and trade you CDs for money or something.
Yeah.
We don't want that. So anyways, so my family, I didn't have a lot of this stuff. I just was very good in school. And throughout my time, I never really focused on being a doctor. I never thought of this as a career, but I had really smart and really well-educated friends that saw that as a real path. And so to keep challenging myself, I chose to stay a little bit on that path in a conservative way okay, let's see how much I can challenge myself with tough classes and challenge myself in this tough pathway that the smartest people around me are choosing to do. And, how can I hang in there with that? And then while doing that, let's say in college, I then realize the laudable aspects and see a potential future there and of medicine, learn more about it specifically and the process. And then I get into medical school actually early in college into an early decision program. So I really had a great college time because I was able to study what I wanted to while also being in medical school. So that was my introduction to this path. It was really, I got lucky that I had good friends that showed me
pushed you a little bit too.
Right. And in college, I went to sort of reached, or at least I wanted to be at the best college I could be at, even though it was very expensive. But then being around really smart people in those classes also helped push me to think about more and to open my worldview. And that was, I think, really formative and important.
Yeah, that is huge because like you talked about, a lot of the physicians that I know, even like the physicians in my family, they're not, I guess, immediate family, but they came from more well-to-do families. And then so just seeing that background from you obviously gives me a better understanding of where you come from. And then like, yeah, you're just a regular guy like me that decided to go even further.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an unfortunate, it comes from a good place and it comes from a historical place, I would imagine, in medicine, because there is a difference in who can afford this level of education, who's willing to take up debt or time that it would take to train when otherwise you could be working and providing for your family. So you have to be from a different sort of background. Nowadays I've benefited at least from loans. I've benefited from, betting on myself to a certain degree, which you might not have been able to do if you come from a certain, even more challenging background or a different challenging time. But I think that, yeah, that's the truth, is that we're all people. And I think as a lot of these exalted professions lose a little bit of their luster with time, as there's exposure, people are going to have a negative experience. As a nurse, you have a lot of negative experience with doctors, and a lot of entitlement.
True.
And a lot of poor behavior, that if your kids displayed that behavior at last weekend with your family for the holidays, that you would
be embarrassed.
You would be embarrassed. You would take them aside. It would be very upsetting. But you and I work around people that act like that on a regular enough basis that other people are supposed to change their behavior to accommodate this person or these people.
And do you think that the background that you have helps with the patient care that you give? Because the stereotype is, if you're from a more well-to-do family, you might look at people a certain way, a little differently, maybe even below. But do you think that helps with your patient care?
I imagine it does, because a lot of the, for example, at leaving where we work, or where you work and where I worked at Mount Sinai, which was a great time, a lot of the most difficult, farewells or telling people I was leaving were people that I had known for on and off for a decade, that were techs, janitors, respiratory therapists, were people that you'd see intermittently, that you knew, you talked to, you always said hi to, and you had this relationship with. And I think with my time of being around other nurses, like my wife and people in her family, I have only just begun to realize that not as many people as I thought that are in my position or in other higher up in the hierarchy of medicine positions have the same relationships with other people, know people's names, continue to talk to them. And so I imagine that's where it comes from. But I don't think I had the best childhood, but I think that a positive that came out of it was that I was definitely around a diverse group of people, and that what position they held or what job they held shouldn't matter. And I had to do all those jobs myself. So
you know where everyone's coming from, you understand it.
I think, I hope so. I'd like to think so. But yeah, I think if more people had that, that background, that time, I think in anything, if you apprentice in something and you know how to do every aspect of the job, or you're familiar with it, you understand more what goes into it. And I think that even if you just take the time to watch what the people that you and I work with every day, like some of the cleaning people that might work in EP, for example, people that are excellent, that do their job, and people who are not. And you try and be considerate of these people. You try and say thank you when they're doing this, even though it's their job. It's like some people would say, well, that's what the money's for. That's the job. It's like, yeah, or we could all be collegial because we're all doing this together, because there's going to be a time and a place when I need a little bit extra out of Brian, and Brian needs a little bit extra out of me in an emergency situation for somebody. And same thing with the cleaning people. We need this turned over. Today is actually a unique moment. You have to have that reserve. You have to have that opportunity in what we do. It can't just be animosity all the time.
It's true. And I want to backtrack to before you got into Locum Tenens, of course, and how I wanted to start our interview together, because the whole breaking down the barrier of that you're a physician. Obviously, you're at the pinnacle of medicine. This is mostly like nursing healthcare podcast, but being able to breaking that barrier of that you're a physician and that everyone could actually see you as a person first is a huge thing for me, just to show that for nurses, at least, just to go on a side tangent, a lot of nurses are just very scared to talk to physicians, whereas even in the place that used to work with us and I work now, a lot of people are very afraid to talk to anybody. What I respect about you the most is that you were so easy to go up to, talk to, and it's not even just about the patient. You could talk about sports, you could talk about anything there. But going back to what I wanted to get into is like, obviously we worked in a big medical center. What drew you to work there? And then we'll go into what drew you to leave.
I had done my medical school there. We're not in the same building, let's say, but I'd done my medical school there. And then I wanted to stay for the anesthesiology residency because I really saw it as excellent. And from being a med student there, after that, I did fellowship away from there because I wanted to have a unique, more geographical difference, also hospital culture difference, just to see what things were like at other places. So I'd left and went to Atlanta for 2 years. So I came back and I decided to come back. One, I missed the city at that time. Now, I don't know if I would agree as much personally with missing the city per se, because that wanes a little bit. That luster gets lost, I think, with time and with things happening, and you want more space and more privacy and like that. But I missed the city at that time. I missed the enjoyment of being able to go out as someone who goes out rarely, that you can sort of just go out anytime and almost anywhere in any sort of neighborhood. And you can have a very good, the vibes are positive and overflowing almost anywhere. And so you don't have to worry that, it's a Tuesday night in Atlanta.
Nothing's open.
It's Tuesday in New York. The restaurants you're going to want to go to as like, hey, my one night a month, they're going to be popping. Like if you wanted to try and get a reservation at these fancy places, it doesn't matter how or what day it is. It's going to be really rough. So I wanted to come back to someplace to here because it was familiar. It was fun. I missed the city. My now wife, who I'd been in a relationship with long distance for that time, she was here. She was settled. She had a very good job. Her family's around here. And so I knew I wanted to be back here. And Sinai specifically, I saw as great people. I knew all the people that I would work with. I knew what sort of what would be expected of me. I knew all those little nuance things that you wouldn't know other places. And I also knew how the pay structure worked because it's a little unique because it's not as salary defined as most jobs, even as many jobs that have a lot of, you're on call, you get paid a little extra. This is extreme actually with the at-risk income. So a lot of people that aren't that knowledgeable of the place would be scared of it. I think it was very familiar to me. And I also knew it had good people. I knew it had good residents. I knew it was a plus place to work because people tried and worked hard. And that's really important because if you've worked at lesser hospitals or lesser quality health systems, and luckily I have only had that tangentially at like small rotational things, you see that, that's not the level of care that I want to be involved in. And so I knew the level of care that they gave. So I was like, hey, let's get back there. I understood I'm going to work a lot. I understood, what sort of frustrations I would have in the operating room, what sort of frustrations I would have in the ICU. But also, there's some things I didn't know because as a trainee to being a professional, you're not, you don't know everything. So I was pretty in on like, this would be a great place to start working. And it would be a comfortable place insofar as I know who to go to for help. And I know how sincere they are. And so I was excited to be there.
And then, so with all the excitement of you being there and all the things that you learned being at that health system, what was the thing that broke you to be like, hey, I need to get out of here? And what do I do from here? Because I know we've talked about it a few times, especially when you're actually on your way out. And then I couldn't understand it at the time because I didn't know what exactly you were looking for, but I did understand like travel nursing. And that's the closest thing I could think of what you're doing. So like, what made you go into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I think it was the slow accumulation of just certain frustrations with how work went over time. So I was there in total about 5 years. And even though COVID was a part right in the middle of that time frame, and I do half my time as a critical care doctor and did all of my time at that point, that wasn't a big negative for me. That wasn't like the thing. And I've talked about that elsewhere, so I don't want to berate that. But it really was that with the high demand of hours and you're there late a lot, it's not really clear necessarily when you leave a lot of days, especially as an anesthesiologist, because it's sort of open-ended. You slowly get a little sour, and definitely took that out on my wife, or definitely showed those frustrations to her consistently. And then additionally, I'm living with her for those 5 years. And she's a nurse practitioner and she works 3/12s usually, right? The fourth day every once in a while. And I'm a little ruined by her schedule, frankly, because she also deals with life and death and she's on the rapid response and those sorts of things. She's dealing with critically ill patients, but she's not coming home as consistently, just like, man, just stressed
Drained
every
or
day and just drained the same way. Now, obviously, we do have different roles. So there's different, different amounts of responsibility that you're going to feel and take home with you. But I noticed that with her having those breaks, right? She's got 3+ days off each week, that she definitely had a different outlook. And I know that I like doing lots of things. I like wanting to work out consistently. I want to eat consistently properly, the way I think is that I should. I want to be able to sleep consistently. And unfortunately, without deliberitely choosing to, I chose to have a career and a path that was unfortunately not conducive to consistently sleeping well. I was in-house call for the ICU 3 to 4 times a month. I'm overnight home call for cardiac anesthesiology. And then I'm at a place where, it's not as clear when you're going to leave. So even if you think you have a short day, as you and I both know, it's like, oh, I think this is a quiet day. It's like, no, we're actually going to move all those other cases in your room.
into your room.
Right. So you actually did a great job. You're actually going to be punished by actually doing more because you got done.
Because you got it too quick.
Right. And so that's a challenge in the operating room and in these procedural places. So just with time, this wore me down. And there were different frustrations in the operating room and in the ICU that I had. And a lot of nurses here know what I'm talking about because you're going to have a lot of people that are, if you're not on the floor, you're in one of these worlds, whether you're PACU, perioperative, or in the ICU, as a lot of people are, especially when you want to get to a stepping stone to something else, to have that good experience. There's frustrations there. And you see the slow frustration and change that happens, especially. Now, this was the toughest part for me in the ICU, which I loved a lot of the people. But with the attrition, the exodus of so many nurses post-COVID, that you then do not have enough nursing. You don't have the quality of nursing. And that's what makes the ICU. The ICU is not made by the doctor, by the PA. It's made by the level of nursing care, that 1-on-2 ratio, that's lower ratio, so that you can provide that level of attention. And that's being drained. And then what does that mean? It means that I feel more, that the PAs feel more, that we have to do more. And then also you have more trainees and people that may or may not be appropriately moving through the nursing pipeline, which is a common complaint that I know I've heard at many hospitals, that the standards for graduating orientation, they have to lower and lower.
Yeah, it's unsafe. And I'm sure you've seen the good ones and the really bad ones in those ICUs.
Right.
And then, so as you phase yourself out of working, I guess, full time at Sinai, then you went into Locum Tenens. So when I looked into that, like the Latin term, I'm just going to read it right off Google here, is to hold place of or to substitute for. And then I looked on Reddit, because that's where I like to do a lot of research about stuff too, because I like to hear what people are saying about it. And of course, there's a big spectrum of good and bad, where obviously the worst case scenario is that you're seen as, to make it as simple terms as possible, as a substitute teacher, and where people don't look at you as someone practicing at the highest they can with their scope. But that's not the case for the most part. I feel and I'm sure you could go into this, the people that wrote those are probably physicians that are just not looking at the right way. They're looking at more of like the practicing of, why aren't they doing full-time, if you want to say full-time, versus the people that are looking at it in the really good light, where you want a more healthy way of living. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's how I took it. I took it as, here's an opportunity. Once I actually looked into it more, dove deeper, here's an opportunity where I clearly can have the balance of work and life that I would prefer to have. Here's an opportunity where I can actually find the way to do that. I think, unfortunately, so that's where the term comes from. Right. And I think originally this is a different practice model. This is, people have their own practices as physicians, and they need people to cover for them. That's not really what happens nowadays. That does happen to some smaller degree, but the highest percentage of people in emergency medicine, anesthesiology, let's say, and hospital medicine, there's big swaths of hospitals that are purely covered on a, let's say, rotating basis by just locum physicians. That you'll go to places where the majority of the coverage, or a huge section, 20, 30, 40% every day, the anesthesiologists are locum, travel, contract. The CRNAs are locum, travel, contract, and they're there indefinitely. I've worked at places where people have been there for 2+ years as a contract person. So they've been doing this at the same location, or they've gone there They went somewhere else for 6 months. They've come back again. I've seen this at multiple places now after only working at places so far, that this consistently happens because these places need people so bad. The misconceptions around locum physicians, unfortunately, most of them are perpetuated by people who, like anything, they don't do it. They don't really know this world. So most of the misconceptions or most of the negative attributes that I hear, like when residents might ask me something, which I'll always say, you should probably get a job first and be an attending first, which is my recommendation. But they'll ask about it and they'll say, oh yeah, well, I've talked to people and they say this bad thing, that bad. Okay, so what's that person's experience? Oh, they trained at that place. They've been attending at that place in the academic medicine. That's all they've done. And they have no idea. I'm like, well, I don't know what to say to that. Like, you don't really know what the world is. The truth is, like you were alluding to at the end there, if you want to have a much better situation when it comes to your work-life balance and therefore hopefully be a better clinician, you're going to find that because you're going to be able to have a little bit more volitional control over your schedule to some degree. You're going to sign up specifically for these things. You're not going to be forced into overtime. You're not going to be forced into covering the Saturday procedures. You're going to choose these things deliberately. And so you're going to sign up and know what you're signing up for. And because you know what you're signing up for, you're going to feel better about it because hey, I get paid X, I'm doing Y, this is the relationship. And then you have more time for other things in your life.
So since you're signing onto that and you don't have to do those extra things that usually would come into being I guess like the full-time attending there. So I know you talked about it a little bit in Justin Harvey's video with you. So you're not going to be as paid as high as an in-house anesthesiologist. Is that correct? But at least you're also still being paid for being paid well enough for what you signed up for.
So the pay rate for whatever time that you're there, for the most part, is going to be significantly higher than someone who's working there full time. And this is probably the same in most of these fields, whether it's for the nursing specialties or physician specialties, is that unless truly they just need someone to fill in.
Oh, I see.
Even then, we should assume that those market labor supply and demand dynamics should be in favor of the labor because you are in demand and there might be limited supply such that they're offering this position. And so we should assume that those rates should be higher than the commensurate rate to be there. Or they should be, let's say, equal, but have to make up for the fact of uncertainty related to the job and the temporary nature of it. Or it might make up for it in that it's the same pay rate or similar pay rate, but maybe they have to fund other aspects like malpractice insurance or something. So I would say, if I painted with a broad brush, really all of these openings, nurses, doctors should all be looking for things that are apples to apples comparison when you actually break down how much you make per hour, which is tougher to do if you're not getting paid per hour in the first place. You should be making more because they need you. And that's why they have this job, and they otherwise would hire a full-time person, right? Because what's in their best interest is to keep the train running, but also to meet that labor supply demand and offer the right amount of money. And obviously your employer's always making more off of you, of course, than you are remunerated, because that's the nature of the laboring relationship.
So was it hard finding an agency to take you on, or did you just talk to a whole bunch of them and see which placements that they could actually get you and what fits best for you?
So it wasn't hard per se, but I guess it was hard per se. I don't know. The real challenge is wading through the innumerable options and choices you have. So you can work directly with a hospital. So if you know a place that you just drove past next to your sister's house, like, oh, maybe they need someone, you can reach out to the medical staffing office there as a nurse, physician, et cetera, and see what they want to do. Because they might have a contract with an agency, they might be able to take you on directly, or they might not have any need. But you can also work with agencies for these things to be the go-between. And there's benefits to that. Most of the benefits related to working with an agency is just that you have things streamlined. Right. Their interests are aligned with yours because they're getting paid a piece of whatever the hospital or the client is paying you. There's a little bit on top of that they're receiving. So they want the relationship to continue, for you to be happy, for it to be a safe working environment, because otherwise you're not going to want to continue, et cetera. So finding an agency, I just looked for every agency that was on this registry, the NALTO website, which just lists a lot of agencies that at least say that we're going to do things in a way we're going to say that we have the best interest of the client at heart, right? That's really to be part of NALTO. That's all I have to say. Now, there's a lot of agencies that aren't part of that, so I just went down the list and emailed or reached out to every single one of them.
Like every recruiter possible kind of thing.
Right. And I just was like, hey, the first 20 responses, I'm going to communicate with them. I'm going to ignore the rest. And hopefully from those 20, I'll find a few that are easy to work with. And that's all I was looking for, was just people to communicate with, because jobs are going to pop up here and there and everywhere. And all these agencies are going to be like telemarketing. Like I just wrote about this last week, and like they're all going to be trying to reach out to you no matter what. So I still get stuff from people I don't want to talk to, or people that I've already had bad relationships with, or they've just been frustrating to talk to. So they're going to be there. So the real advice is just put yourself out there to, how do you say, what's the marketing? You want to get, you want to do outbound marketing, right? You want to go to them and ask, hey, I'm in the market for this. I want to get this. It's not all just, you're not just putting a beacon up. You want to like go actually knock on their door and say, hey, I want to work together. And that's what I did.
Is there specific specialties that this would work for better than others?
I'm trying to think of the audience in nursing. So if we're thinking about nursing generally, and then you have nurse anesthesia, you have the NP route, and then you have
proceduralists and ICUs that usually give the best contracts for nursing. But in your case, for like physicians, since you alluded to it in Justin's podcast, where for nursing, you could go a bunch of different options from your training, like how I was heart failure, then I went to EP. I know people like ER jump to all the different ICUs to find what works for them. But for physicians, for the most part, like what you did your residency, you did your fellowship in anesthesia, and now you're an anesthesiologist. And even though you have like the cardiac certification for it, do you feel like that also pigeonholes you into an intensivist anesthesiologist? Like, is it hard to do parallel moves and stuff like that? And then if you were able to, or just being an anesthesiologist, does locums only benefit the ones that can move around, that don't necessarily need like for a proceduralist or a surgeon that need the clientele to technically survive?
So definitely there's an asymmetry in who seems a lot easier, better for. So it's definitely easier for the emergency medicine, anesthesiologist, hospitalist, those sorts of training background, because those are going to be the easiest to insert, because they're just looking for people to take their place. There are plenty, though. Every field, though, is represented as far as having needs. Now, the needs for a surgeon might be a lot different. I have friends that are interventional radiologists that they do locum multiple months a year, where they have a relationship with maybe like a rural hospital, hours from where they live. They stay at a hotel. They're basically there for 6 to 10 weeks, and they get a better pay rate out of it. They feel like they're serving a better community. They have a little break from their normal job. They're being able to offer all of these more advanced things that they can do that hospital otherwise can't. So it's not that hospital can't do IR, but they can't do some of these things that can be elective in nature. So now they feel like they're helping, getting paid better, et cetera, and they have this little break. So I know that community exists for interventional radiology intimately from these people that have sort of shown me that world. And then I see the advertisements for everything. It's going to be harder if you're a cardiac surgeon. It's going to be harder if you're a specific neurosurgeon. But to say that those things don't exist, not true. You might have to. You might be geographically challenged. So in my field, for example, right now, I'm not commuting. I'm commuting half the third of the distance you're commuting to work, right? And I'm on a travel contract. And as most people in nursing know, travel is just a word. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're traveling across the country, especially if you're in these bigger metro areas with lots of hospitals, which we're blessed to be in these areas. So I think that there's specialties that are definitely more well suited to this, that'll have more flexibility, that things will be better out there. And there's also asymmetries in what the pay rates are, what the compensation is for your time relative to like a market rate. So just as everyone in your audience knows, what were nurses getting paid to come to New York City in April 2020, like those rates were fantastic, right? And so that has changed, because what's the rate in 2021 in April? Those dropped significantly.
Just like barely $100, $300 more than what a full-time person is making now. It's like, it's weird that New York City isn't paying, but you go to places like Rochester where they're paying more than what New York City nurses are making right now.
Right. There's a lot of very strange, if you try and look at it in this economics perspective, there seems to be a lot of strangeness that happens. And most of it's related to the non-rational actors, unfortunately, that are both the people hiring and also the workers. In that most of my colleagues and your colleagues and most people watching this that aren't really fully committed to the questionable path. If you're not totally into the risks that are there, you're probably going to take less money. You're probably not going to really compare jobs. You're probably going to you're probably going to be part of the sort of the problem, which is driving wages down, and which is tolerating that your colleagues are leaving, that tolerating that you're having to pick up extra shifts and work harder and cover more patients on your unit. You're sort of part of the problem, right? If you're not making noise or not going to your union rep, if you have a union or otherwise. And medicine is slowly moving in this direction, but a lot of people, they don't want the hassle. They just want to have that good career and take care of their patients.
And so since you've moved
Sorry for
to
the rant.
no, so since you've moved on to locums tenens and contract work, how has your life changed? Like, is it a lot better now? Like,
Yeah, it's significantly better. So the number one reason I wanted to get into this was to I wanted more time. I didn't do this to try and get paid more. I didn't do this to let me try and get a down payment for a house in XYZ time. I just wanted to have more time for myself. And especially going the physician route, you're giving up basically all of your 20s to have this career that you start in your mid 30s. And, you don't really have any money. Your net worth's very negative, all things that Brian would be shaking his finger at, which is not a good decision. And I totally agree with Brian. And so it's been fantastic. The number one person that notices it is my wife, who is so happy for me to have this time. And that's what I was looking for. So I could do other things with my time, which is one, try and give back to people and try and help people make this transition, which is why I have the website, why I try and post all the time, why I try and do this all, with, for no money. And also to spend more time with family and spend more time seeing people and not missing events like Thanksgiving. They're like, "Oh, Tony, you weren't working today?" "No, I wasn't working today, Tita." You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's what I want. I missed enough stuff. I missed enough people's weddings. I missed enough things where those people no longer are on this planet anymore. I was tired of it.
And so, like, one of the biggest things that I'll always attribute to you as well, just seeing how your mind, I believe, is open to different things, especially go into how you're doing it now. We're just going to go into just life right now, is that we always talked in the control room about doing things outside of work. And then I kept talking about real estate, real estate, real estate. And then one day you just came up to me, was like, "Bro, just do it. Like, what are you really waiting for?" And then it stuck in my head for a good, like, 2 weeks. And then I ended up pulling the trigger. And then it's been one of the biggest things that I've done in my life because it's given me this exponential wealth. Now that I've started that, now that I've continued to move forward with it. And I'll always attribute that to you because, like, in your workplace too, there's, like, you were talking about people giving you advice without really knowing stuff. And then all of a sudden you just needed that little extra push that you also talked about in the other podcast you were on, where you just needed to talk to someone that kind of gave you a more positive outlook on there are greener pastures out there. And that was one of the biggest things that helped me on my journey towards, obviously this is like a podcast about options outside of medical, but the ultimate goal is to have that time freedom. And sadly, but it does come with generating more money, more wealth and all that. And then you were able to do that for me. And I'll always attribute that to you. So that was just like a side tangent that I wanted to go on.
I didn't realize that it was, I knew at the time because you had talked about it in a certain way, as we all talk about certain things aspirationally. I guess I didn't realize that it was so, that you had the level of apprehension about it. I thought that you were more like that it was just inevitable, but you weren't doing it yet.
Yeah.
And so I'm really happy to hear that it's been going well for you. I didn't realize that it was that was really that time zero, I guess.
2 questions here. If you're to start your career over again, would you do anything differently?
No, I think the closest thing to do different would be to consider maybe not doing fellowships. That's always the biggest decision for people.
That's a
in
big
the
money
physician
grab,
route.
right? Not money grab,
Yeah,
but
you lose a lot of expected future earnings because you're taking a year off, and at least in anesthesiology subspecialties and most, you're not making more because you did cardiac, or not making more because you do OB, or not whatever it is. So I wouldn't, because I had a lot of really formative training that I think puts me in a place to give the best patient care and be the safest physician possible.
And lastly, what advice would you give a physician or anyone looking into going into contracted work?
I think the biggest thing is, if you're considering it at all, that's the biggest and toughest jump. The next biggest jump is to really see that it's possible, or to believe that it's possible for you, that it can work. Do I have to move places? Do I have to do these things? And I think for that, the most efficacious way to move forward is to have someone that can help mentor you through the process. So you have to find someone that's done something close enough to what you've done, that's close enough to what you want to do or want to be, that you can look up to realize like this is possible. Because without that, it's very scary and there's lots of things that can happen. So you want someone that has at least a taste of that world to help walk you through some of those things.
And if anyone wanted to contact you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I think going on my website, tonyvullo.com, you can either book an official call because some people like that better, which is the reason I put that on there. Otherwise, people can send me an email through the website, sign up for my newsletter. They can also on LinkedIn and Twitter. I basically post every day for the last 4 months, especially on LinkedIn. And people can just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to people about this process. If it's for you, I want you to find that better balance.
All right, perfect. And Tony, sorry to cut it short, but got some family things to do.
That's
right.
okay.
Thank you for coming on here. I hope that I could have you on here again. And
Definitely.
maybe we'll also talk some Buffalo Bills and what's going on with the season.
Go Bills. Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. And everybody out there, good luck, whatever you're doing. It's your life. Grab it. Get in there and just make that investment like Brian did.
Thanks, Tony. All right. Have a great day, man.
Thank you. You too.